Joining us right now via Zoom chat is Dr. Joseph Shaw, the chairman of the Latin Mass Society of England and Wales. Good morning to you, sir. Dr. Shaw, good morning.
Good morning.
We're grateful for your time today. Thank you. You wrote a great article at 1 Peter 5 this week, Why British and Commonwealth Catholics Venerate Their Protestant Monarch. And, I even saw your blog post over at the Latin Mass Society, and I think you're spot on in that Americans, anyway, I'm sure there are many others around the world, but Americans, really Catholics, even traditional Catholics, they struggle to wrap their head around the monarchy and how English Catholics are emotionally attached to it in the way that they are. And I think they're surprised by that. We just simply don't understand it. So from one perspective, I thought the article was very, very good. You were breaking that down and explaining how that works. And I talked to Edward Penton last week about this, right after Queen Elizabeth died. And we were trying to dive into that issue as well. But one of the things I think you actually expounded upon that I was trying to understand, I would like you to start with this in the conversation, and then I want to get to King Charles III, is that, it seems like there's a bit of a rocky history when it comes to the monarchy in England and English Catholics, persecuted under Henry VIII and his daughter. There was a brief time where you had, in the 17th century, where you had a Catholic king, but then England decided it didn't want a Catholic king, and it exiled that. We all, as I said before, we all know the story of the tragedy of Bonnie Prince Charlie's failed attempt to retake it all. How do modern English Catholics see that history today?
Well, the things you refer to, they are a long time ago. That's the first obvious fact, which you just have to accept that things move on. A lot of English Catholics are romantically inclined to sympathize with the Jacobite cause, but the Jacobite cause is not a current viable concern. I mean, it's not. There is no Jacobite political movement, and the fact is that the papacy accepted the situation in the 18th century, and we just have to accept the situation. I mean, just like, this has happened many times before when there's been a change of dynasty and it's been a bit dubious, and there are people who are kind of left behind supporting the wrong guys. After a while, then, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, in fact, the passage of time itself confers legitimacy onto rulers. Otherwise, you'd be always fighting, the war from 200 years ago. So, as a matter of ancient history, well, we just have to move on. An awful lot of countries have dubious bad things in the past. America, I know, is no exception to that. There is, difficult issues with Catholics being treated badly under the American Constitution, and of course not just Catholics. But we can't be always harping on about that. And the fact is that Catholics today in Britain are not persecuted in a major way, at least not in the way that they have been historically. Maybe new ways are being devised, but that's probably not the topic for today. The fact is that in the current situation, the monarchy represents a religious aspect and a traditional aspect of the British Constitution, which it would be terrible to lose from a Catholic point of view. Even though they're not ideal, they're not the ideal monarchs. Perhaps the history isn't ideal. Their personal views aren't ideal. Nevertheless, that is what they represent as a part of our constitutional situation. Yeah,
well said. Queen Elizabeth II, when she did pass, there was quite a number of people who came out on the internet, social media, Twitter, whatever, YouTube, and with lots of vitriol, lots of hate. They had quite a bit to say, and quite ugly, I would argue. I was sort of indifferent to Queen Elizabeth, I would say, personally, but were you at all surprised by that? I mean, did you expect that? I mean, the royal family has had deep ties at the global level for a very long time. So how did you see that vitriol that came out over the last week?
It's not altogether surprising. There is a very, very small group of Republicans in Britain. I mean, it's as a political cause, it's absolutely marginal. One would say, in fact, it's a lunatic fringe almost. There are prominent politicians who I think, if pressed, would probably say, well, in principle, they prefer a republic. But in practice, it's just not on the table. That is just not politically possible. No major political party supports it. Nevertheless, we're used to completely crazy positions being taken up by extremists. And now we've got to the stage where you can't have a statue of a past great man or woman in a public place. You can't have a history book which simply tells the ordinary narrative. You can't have any symbols of nationhood without a certain group of people going completely mad about it, as if you were putting up a kind of swastika or something, and they profess, in fact, not to see the difference between one and the other. So I'm not surprised by that. No one should take it seriously. Any more seriously than they should take, the other ravings of these individuals. Now, unfortunately, sometimes they are taken seriously. They're statues are removed, and they get away with things they shouldn't get away with, and so on. But on something really important like this, of course, in Britain, they're not going to get away with anything. It says more, really, about the people who publish them. I mean, in this particular case, as we all know, the New York Times has really made itself into something very strange over this, as what it would like to think of itself as a mainstream organ of comment. It's putting forth itself in a way which is really ought to belong on the fringes of the kind of blogosphere or the comment sections of websites. And that, I mean, somebody remarked in a British newspaper, well, actually, ultimately, this is actually quite harmful to the perception of America from abroad. Not least the special relationship, but of course it's not going to be limited to this issue. This kind of lunacy affects everything, turns everything into rubbish in the end.
Adrian, did you have a question?
No, go ahead. I have 1 minute to break.
We have about a minute here, and one of the questions I was going to ask is that the American understanding of the monarchy as a figurehead, as almost like a trophy, a relic, a statue of something gone by. Did Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II have any actual? I know constitutionally she had a role to play, but I'm curious. Can you help us understand? Did her say have weight and power in government?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because the way that she exercised her political influence was behind the scenes, completely behind the scenes. So she'd be briefed about everything. So she'd know everything that was going on. She'd get security briefings, and she was constantly talking to the Prime Minister. Now, what is said in those meetings, no one is ever going to know. There are rumors that she has a style of Socratic questioning. Sorry, I'm still referring to her in the present tense. She had a style of Socratic questioning which made prime ministers uncomfortable about doing certain things.
And I want to switch a little bit to King Charles III. And what are the expectations under King Charles III? This is a guy who has been around he's 70-some years old. He's just now coming into the throne. He's gone through, as the whole world has been able to see, lots of drama in the family. We all remember the divorce with Princess Diana, her tragic passing, and then the boys. The world got to watch the boys come up, and the drama, especially under Prince Harry now and his wife, and that continues to be an issue in the royal family. But it's more of the issues of King Charles's own personal passion projects. He was spent decades now about the climate change issues. He has partnered with the World Economic Forum on the Great Reset. It's one of its biggest cheerleaders. And yet in his first address to the English people, he said that he would have to put his passion projects, and my words, not his, on hold, on pause, because I guess as king, he would not have the time for that. Could you start there? Help us to understand any ideas what he might have meant by that.
Yeah, it's time, of course, is one issue, but it's not just time. I think what he's referring to is the fact that as Prince of Wales, he had a certain freedom of manoeuvre in terms of promoting causes. The Queen was, all monarchs are patrons of a huge number of, charities and things. But it's an amazing thing to have the Queen as your patron. But those charities are pretty mainstream. The Prince of Wales is able to give his name to somewhat more eccentric and marginal things. And that is what he did. And he did it with a lot of effectiveness, actually, particularly on the issue of architecture. So, and that perhaps is what may be uppermost in his mind about his passion projects. He built a village, Poundbury, which showcases the kind of architectural style which he likes, which is more traditional type of houses, which are built with beauty in mind, not just utility. And that's been a huge thing for him. He has other interests and concerns as well. But from now on, he's got to be absolutely politically neutral, at least in public. And that's part of the role of the head of state. I'm not just a hereditary monarch. I think one of the reasons why Americans find it difficult to understand is that they have this executive head of state. And that's actually not that common around the world. There are a lot of countries with non-executive heads of state. So you never hear about the president of Germany, Italy, places like that. Well, why not? Because they're non-executives. They are basically retired politicians who are given the top job. They have some reserve powers in the constitutional crisis, but they don't go around making themselves notorious because their role is to be the person who stands behind. If something goes wrong, they're there. Everyone can run around them. They have experience. They have respect. But actually, a lot of those guys are pretty forgettable. And that's one of the advantages of having a monarchy is that you have someone who has that neutrality, but is not forgettable. He's there for a long time. And everyone knows about him. Everyone remembers him as a child if they're old enough, and so on and so forth. So there's a kind of affection and loyalty which you couldn't get in any other way with that political neutrality. And of course, if he starts doing controversial things, then half the people are going to dislike what he does. So you can see that there's just inevitably he's got to be sensible about that.
That brings me to a question I wanted to ask in regards to the role of the royalty. I feel as Americans, we kind of get this education of anti-monarchy. We get taught, we're rebelling against the British crown. That's why we're Americans. We kind of say, oh, I don't really care about what's going on in the monarchy. And they find that to be very true. I'm very unaware of anything about Queen Elizabeth prior to all the eulogies coming out. And the thing that really bothered me was, as a Catholic, we should have a veneration for the monarchy because it's a reflection of the monarchy of God, the hierarchy of heaven. And a lot of these Catholics are like, oh, I don't really care about this. We fought this war, so we don't have to worry about the monarchy in Britain. And there's this disdain for the role of the royalty. And we mentioned at the top of it about the Protestant aspect of it, of having a Protestant royalty that rejects the Catholic faith. If you become monarch, you have to reject, you can't be Catholic in England. So what exactly is the role of royalty in England, especially since, like you were saying, they don't really have too much executive power in terms of actually doing day-to-day things. They have some aspects of it and ability, but they don't really exercise it. So what exactly is the role of the royalty? Is it purely symbolic? And if it is, why is that important?
Well, every country has got to have a head of state. And that's the sort of stepping stone for this discussion. And if you don't have an executive head of state, and there are quite big problems with having an executive head of state, which you've experienced in America in recent years, because all your eggs are in one basket with that guy. And as one way to compensate for that, in American Constitution, is to give him very short terms of office, 4 years, and not to allow more than one re-election. That itself causes problems. You're constantly campaigning, and there's constant turnover. The need for national name recognition means you end up with political dynasties, the Kennedys, the Clintons, and so on. So it's a problem that every country has to face one way or another. So the question you need to ask is, well, how do hereditary monarchies deal with that political problem, which everyone has, and do they do it well or not? It's not that, oh, well, what's the point of having her because she hasn't got very much power? Well, she's the head of state. You've got to have one of those. So, the parliamentary system is it works very well for us. The monarchy is, because it's above the fray, can serve as a center of loyalty and affection. She represents the nation. She can talk to the nation in times of crisis. She has done over many years. And King Charles will do the same. So if there's a national catastrophe, for example, he can go there in person. He's not just an abstraction. He's not directly. In America, perhaps you venerate the Constitution in a way that we venerate the monarch. But the Constitution can't come and give a speech. It can't visit, the place where there's been a hurricane. So the monarchy has this kind of personal touch, which is quite difficult to achieve. To have someone who represents the nation, who can do those things and is not controversial. Is not party political.
That's a fascinating point, Doc. And I have a question here. I think that is an important thing to preserve. But going back to what you said before the break, you were saying that there was a small minority of people who were outspoken against the Queen and her legacy. For example, I've seen people criticize the colonial past of the monarchy. And although they are the minority, it seems to me that the minority oftentimes has the louder voice. And I'm just wondering what your take is, what the monarchy is going to look like in the next 50 years, considering that a lot of people hear these loud, outspoken people and they agree with them or kind of get hypnotized by them to believe that the past is bad and that we should get rid of it.
Yep.
What do you think about the monarchy in the next 50 years?
The attack on the past, that's something which has been going on since the Enlightenment, since the Reformation. The idea that the past is bad, the past has got, everything that's bad and we've got to make a new start, we've got to get rid of this, we've got to get rid of that. Attack on traditions. It's a profoundly anti-Catholic attitude. And it's something which we constantly have to resist. Obviously, there are things in the past which are bad, but institutions which survive through the past into the present have prestige, which you can't just create out of thin air. So you can't create a new constitution, for example, in a country, unless the country's gone through some sort of terrible trauma. It's almost always a terrible mistake to try and get a new constitution. Because, how do you get people to accept it? We accept the constitutional arrangements in any country, basically, because they're there, because they've been there, because they've worked for some years. So the attack on the past is, you're absolutely right, it's very real and it's quite powerful at the moment, but it's something which we've just got to resist. And we resist it quite well. In fact, in the UK, we're not as obsessed with the bad things about the past as some countries have been. Perhaps we have less reason to be worried. And that's one of the odd things about the whole Black Lives Matter stuff. It's been imported into Britain by people who get very, very excited about it. And I know I had this in my institutions in Oxford University and stuff, and people say, oh, it's all terrible, it's all about colonialism. Actually, basically, it isn't. Britain was the country which abolished slavery, which suppressed the transatlantic slave trade. The monarchy, it was there during the colonial period, but it was there for a very long time before that as well. Actually, the colonialism is a very short period of British history, and it's pretty irrelevant to the monarchy. The monarchy's it's got nothing to do with colonialism. The monarchy goes back to the kings of Wessex. After the Romans left, this guy turns up in Wessex, he makes himself king, and he says that he's the descendant of Odin. King Charles III is the direct descendant of this guy called Cerdic. So, that's one of the oldest continuing institutions on the planet Earth. It's actually older than the Catholic Church. So
we're down to just seconds now with Dr. Joseph Shaw. I want to sneak this last question in, but you're really only going to have about 15 to 30 seconds. Why did King Charles III have to guarantee that he would not do anything to the Church of Scotland?
The Church of Scotland is in a slightly complicated constitutional arrangement with Britain, which I can't explain in 15 seconds. I'm terribly sorry.
I just find that very interesting that is a preeminent portion of his proclamation, his pledge as becoming King of England. You know, we will be oppress the English people. We won't oppress the Scottish Church. I don't understand that. Maybe we'll have to have you back so you can explain
because
that.
Because of Charles II.
I see. Charles II's to blame for that. All right, God bless you, Dr. Joseph Shaw, chairman of the Latin Mass Society. Check him out at 1peter5.com. His article's great there. But that is going to do it for hour number 1 of Catholic Drive Time today. Don't forget to support your local Catholic radio station. It means the world to us. Our second hour will be 9 a.m. Central, 10 Eastern. grnonline.com/CDT. God love you. God bless you.